This webinar is going to focus on the creative component of Family Data Jam, which is really probably the most exciting and the hallmark of the Data Jam competition. So we're all really excited to talk to you about that today. Let's see, I'm gonna pull it forward. There I am. So my name is India Futterman, and I am the Education Program Specialist at Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies in Millbrook, New York. And I'm coordinating and organizing and running the Hudson Data Jam, our version of the Family Data Jam this year. And Bess Caplan is also present.
Hi folks, I'm going to go ahead and just mute everyone. So if it is your turn to talk, you'll have to unmute yourself. So I'm Bess Caplan. I'm with the Baltimore Ecosystem Study, which is a project at the Cary Institute. I'm down here in Baltimore, and I run the Baltimore Data Jam competition.
And hi everyone, I'm Bowie Zunino, and I am one of the founders and executive directors at the Wassaic Project, which is a neighbor to the Cary Institute, and we are an arts institution with an artist residency and an education program.
Excellent, thank you. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time in our webinar series, I'll just give a little bit of information about Family Data Jam. So Family Data Jam is a new category that we introduced on our Hudson and Baltimore Data Jam projects, and those competitions have been going on for several years, but the Family Data Jam is brand new, and it challenges children of all ages, students of all ages, and their family members to creatively interpret data sets, scientific ecological data sets that collected by scientists at both Cary Institute and Baltimore Ecosystem Study, as well as a whole other variety of scientific agencies and research institutions. And those data sets are made available to you in the form of a spreadsheet that you can download and graph and then identify trends in the data and then creatively communicate the trends that you observe in your data. And what's great about the data sets that we use in Data Jam is that many of them are long-term. So a lot of ecological phenomena are only identifiable, or the ecological patterns might be identifiable at broader timescales. And so that's why these long-term data sets, some of which have data from over 100 years, can really give you a holistic and much more interesting data story. So Family Data Jam is a great way to incorporate STEAM, or science, technology, engineering, art, and math into your home life. Now that social distancing is in place and schools are closed, this is a great virtual option for sort of an extracurricular or enrichment activity that you can do at home. And there's a chance to win a cash prize for the top Family Data Jam project. So I just want to remind everybody of some important dates. So tomorrow, May 13th, is when registration is due and parental consent forms are due. So registration simply entails giving us a little bit of information on an online form about how many participants you're going to have in your Family Data Jam team, a little bit of information about where you're from, how you heard about the competition, and then the parental consent form is something that we require of all our participants, and that just says that you agree or you allow or deny Cary Institute, or BEF, BEF, to release photos of your project, and in some cases your child or you, in our publicity materials. And Wednesday, May 27th, 2 weeks from tomorrow, is when the final project is due. And I'll give you some information about submitting the project at the end of the presentation. And then Friday, June 19th, we'll be having a virtual award ceremony and project expo. So there's going to be more details on that to come. But unfortunately, we couldn't have our in-person expo this year, but the virtual award ceremony will still be a great way to see everyone else's projects, and we'll be announcing the winners then. So make sure to tune in for that. And I also just wanted to give a quick review of all the components that are required for a Family Data Jam project submission. So this webinar is going to focus specifically on your creative project, but The entire project has to include a title, of course, at least one graph of your chosen data set, and that could be any type of graph that you feel is most appropriate, a line graph, a bar graph. You can view our previous webinar for a little bit more info on graph choice and graphing in different programs like Excel or Google Sheets. We're going to ask for a short description of the data trend that you observe in your data set from your graph. So that'll just be a couple sentences. A brief interpretation of that data trend. So why you think you saw the specific pattern that you did in your data set after graphing. And then you're going to do the creative project, which is what we're going to be talking about. And then you want to briefly explain your creative project, how it connects to the data, what you're trying to convey, and who your intended audience is. And you can see this in more detail in the rubric, which I'll also touch on in a few slides. And then, of course, you want to cite your data set. It's very important in your reference section. And before we proceed, I just wanted to notify everyone, point everyone to an important link that's a little bit hidden on our Data Jam page, or it could be when you go online to the Cary Institute website, and you go to the Data Jam page, there's this gray sidebar that at the very bottom says important documents, and that's the home of a lot of the important documents that you'll need to participate. So your consent forms, the rubric to let you know what criteria we're judging our projects on, a written component form which walks you through all the different components you need, all the different points you need to touch on in your verbal explanation of your data graph. And then you also have the Data Jam guidebook, which is an overall guidebook to the entire competition, FAQs, information about the award ceremony. That's just our overview document. So that's just an important link for you to know about. And yeah, so with that, I will turn it over to Bowie. He's going to introduce Wassaic Project.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Oh, I don't have control of moving the slides though. So
so you just, yeah.
I'll just say
notify me. I will.
I said a little bit about who the Wassaic Project is in my introduction to my name, but yeah. So we are just down the road from the Cary Institute in Wassaic, which is a hamlet of Armenia, and that's one of our big buildings that is an art exhibition space. And as I said, we have a year-round artist in residency program, as well as we bring our artists into the community. So we have you can go to the next slide. We have a drop-in education space as well as summer camps, and we bring our artists into our local schools. And this past year, the Cary Institute and the Wassaic Project have been partnering and getting to work together, going into the schools and meeting with teachers and students. And so it's been a really exciting collaboration. So, and last year we did a little bit of participation with the Data Jam, but this year getting to do this virtual Data Jam and be sort of the art and creative side has been really, really fun. So hopefully our sort of collaboration will shed a little bit of light on how sort of art and science can really flourish together and enhance each other. So next slide. So, you know, when we talked about collaborating, one of the first things we talked about was that the Data Jam's sort of creative component is just storytelling, and it's storytelling through art. And, you know, narrative or storytelling is the human context for data. So when we try to take a data set and convey it visually, we're just doing the exact same thing that an artist does. They take the thing they want to say to the world, and with the medium of their choice, usually it's the medium that will best represent the project or the medium that they work in, they use that to tell the story. So there's a lot of similarities between the way that an artist is going to interpret and think about what they're saying and a way that a scientist, and especially in this project, the creative part of this project is going to take place. So we sort of dug in these next examples of how you can use visuals or an art form, and Cary Institute's awesome in this Data Jam to be very creative about what your art form can be. So we can go to the next slide, because this is sort of the most universal thing I would think that we could all sort of start with, is a song or music sort of tells a story. And so I picked two songs that are just so sort of universal as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You know we start with Rudolph and what, you know, he was being laughed at for having his shiny nose. And then we had this day that happened where he was really needed. And then all of a sudden he became sort of revered and a hero. And that sort of is a story that tells a change. Something happened. And Puff the Magic Dragon's another song that, you know, has a change where we know something happens, then something shifts, and then there's an after effect. And so that is sort of one of the first things that came to mind. And also when I've worked with India and heard her presentations and seen that some students in the past have done sort of song parodies, these were two sort of very readily available examples. And of course, I went really deep in songs that tell stories, and these sort of felt the most appropriate for the Family Data Jam. But from this slide on is going to be only artists that the Wassaic Project has worked with. So I wanted to sort of stay true to who we are, but I wanted to at least go in a little gently with the music. But theater, we've done a lot of theater with kids, and you know, this is from one of our summer camps, but thinking about sort of homemade props in theater that you could do if you have, you know, multiple members of your family, you could act out a sketch of the change that you see. And that's a really, you know, active narrative way to tell a story. Next slide. Dance or performance, again, this is from a festival of ours, but again, dance and performance, two people can tell a story and show emotion and without too much extra stuff. Next slide. Sculpture. So this is an artist, and my examples are trying to just show art that was not intended at all for this sort of presentation, but art that tells a story or can really sort of convey fact. And this is an artist, Jackie Monk, who works with historical facts. And so she's using text to convey these two different gravestones, one of an amputee of a man's leg and his body that were buried in the same cemetery. So the way that a sculpture can actually give a ton of information. We can go to the next slide. And then some sculptures or paintings or drawings place you right into a moment where you almost have to say like, what happened here? So you sort of see the after effect of like, well, how did I get here? And so that's another way that art can kind of push you and be like, whoa, what is the story here? So that's another way that you can sort of think about how art can convey, you know, maybe you can push your data set. Well, what happens if this was going to go another 100 years? We'd get to this ludicrous place, and you could make that image. All right, next slide. Again, this is an artist, Christopher Daniels. This was an amazing body of work that he's working on calling Explaining the World to My Daughter. And so again, this sort of idea of pushing the absurd, but really conveying something and telling a story and making you wonder like, whoa, like what happened here and how did we get here? All right, next. This is a book that one of my partners worked on that tells the story of a prison break. So again, photography, you can set up images, you can photograph in your yard the actual thing happening, you can use text. These are all ways that artists convey stories. But again, this is really just to give you sort of an example. All right, next slide. I don't have too many more of these. Oh, this is actually my last one. And this is an artist named Elizabeth McTurnan, who was one of our first artists to ever go into the schools with us, first class of residents. And she is an artist who works with data, and not necessarily in a scientific way, but she uses scientific procedures and she sort of borrows from the scientific world to create her art. And so one project that she did many years ago was she went out into the desert with her collaborator, and they measured human emotion. So how far an apology would travel or how far a laugh would travel. And they sort of use these scientific methods for something that is very human. And so if that's of interest, her name is in this presentation too. And these are just a few projects that sort of came to mind of ways that artists are telling their stories or conveying information to people, and ways that you could kind of stretch and get creative about your project, while also consuming a bit of art and making some art yourself. So I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much. I think that, let me see. Yep, confirmed. That was amazing. Thank you. It was so great to see artists that are working locally. And are these artists in residence, or have they been in the past?
Yes, almost all of those artists have either exhibited with us, performed with us, or been in residence with us. And most of them, all of those things.
That's wonderful. That was so great. Yeah, thank you so much, Bowie. And so I just want to transition into looking at some past projects, project submissions from Hudson Data Jam. So this is our first year doing Family Data Jam, so I won't have any family projects to show as examples, but the creative project in and of itself is fairly similar between our Hudson Data Jam and our Family Data Jam. So I wanted to bring in a couple different examples of different media that are used, different approaches to showing the data in an art form. So some students choose to very explicitly illustrate their graph, either with like literally illustrations embellishing their graph, or by building a 3D version of their graph that has some artistic element in it to more fully immerse you in the data story and in the context of the data. So this is a project that was using our lead poisoning data. That also includes data on poverty and housing trends, because all of those three concepts are related. But this graph is showing the amount of lead poisoning and childhood poverty and housing type, and the percentages of each using peeled paint in these test tubes. The volume of peeled paint where it's marked on the test tubes represents a percentage. And so the significance of the peeled paint in this project is that peeling lead paint, of course, or chipping lead paint, is a major source of childhood lead poisoning, or lead poisoning in general, and that's often found in pre-1950s housing, which is what this far right cluster of test tubes shows. So this is kind of a literal interpretation, but they also included a window that was meant to show where the paint would be chipping off of. So this is a very clear representation of data. But sometimes the graphs themselves are not explicitly a part of your creative project, and that's okay, as long as you're still talking about and addressing the trends that you see in your data. You don't actually have to bring in numbers per se, but if you can tell the story based on your data in an effective way, that's also a perfectly good approach, and also even a greater challenge sometimes. And this is we received some comic books, which I think are a great medium and particularly amenable to telling a data story, because of their incorporation of the inherent use of both text and imagery in the comic book format. And so this is a comic book based on pollen data from sediment cores taken from Mohonk Lake. So basically, when you take a core sample, the lowermost material, which is dirt or dust or any sort of sediment, is your oldest, and the top is the most recently deposited. And so the fossils that you can find, most often they're pollen fossils or other microorganisms, are indicators of what was around at each time that you take them, the increment of the sediment core. So this is a data set that illustrates the relative densities and diversities of different trees since the Ice Age till the present, based on the fossils that were identified in a sediment core. And we don't usually see this data set used because it's a little bit complicated, but I think these students did an excellent job. The whole story is based on a kid who goes back in time and sees all the different trees, however many thousands of years ago he chooses to travel. So he meets a mammoth who guides him along the way. I really like this project. These students chose to use our zebra mussel data set. So zebra mussels are an invasive species that were introduced to the Hudson River in the early 90s, late 80s. And so they really, they outcompeted other organisms, other native organisms in the Hudson River ecosystem. And so this is a fake news report on that initial introduction of zebra mussels in 1991 is when this one starts. And so we have mussels interviewing different organisms. So we have a phytoplankton, that's this bottom right still, and he's basically complaining about how the zebra mussels are pushing him out or consuming him. I like this one. It was a good personification. And this was used, it was just puppets that were used. I think they're great. And I'm gonna play a little video. This is a dance that we saw. I'm gonna see if I can share my computer audio as well. Can you hear that? Excellent. I won't share the whole thing, but this is an example of an interpretive dance based on data set that polychlorinated pollution in the current actually fishes. So yellow fish here possess a certain gene that makes them more resistant to the effects of this contaminant. They're happy with other fishes die, and it basically have effects. They're really interesting this way. And they also use text to narrate the dance. If you don't see it in David Jam, I would love to do more. And moving on to the next slide. We've seen a lot of song parodies as well.
India, just so you know, we could not hear you over the music very well. So if there's very
I'll turn it down, I guess.
Said you could repeat it.
Sure. Yes. Sorry about that. No, I was explaining that the dance is based on a data set that shows that certain fish with a certain gene are more resistant to a toxic pollutant in the Hudson. And so we see the non-resistant fish drop dead at the beginning, and then our more fit fish surviving and reproducing. And then we have text at the top sort of narrating the dance, and very effective, I think. And here, I guess I'll just introduce this before I play it if the sound is interfering. This is a song parody based on Bohemian Rhapsody using a data set of eel migration rates at different tributaries along the Hudson. So I'm just going to play a little clip of this. It's pretty brilliant.
I'm just a glass eel migrating endlessly, 'cause I'm little now, time to go, skinny and a little slow. Anyway the river flows, doesn't really matter to me, I see a little silhouette of a bass stripe, don't eat me, I pray. A fisherman in weird tents, very, very frightening me. Trying to catch me, all these nets, please let me go.
This was a great project because they talked about the many different factors affecting eel populations. I mean, it was longer than this. This was just a little snippet of it, but they talk about the migration patterns. They talk about the different factors or the different threats to eel populations because they are an endangered species in the Hudson River. And I thought this was also a great project from the past year. And then we also have a lot of a fair amount of stop motion animation. And stop motion is a great way to, is a great animation method because it doesn't require a huge amount of drawing and sort of all the, or any even computer programming to do animation. It's just you take a series of photos, moving your objects incrementally, and it creates the sense of movement. And I just want to show a quick example of a little snippet from a stop motion that we received. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. This one's about acid.
I can't wait till I get to the water. Come on.
And so I just want to quickly go through what we're looking for in our creative component submissions. So the creative project is worth 60% of your total project score. So it's worth the majority of your total score. So we are judging the projects based on 4 different criteria that are weighed equally: creativity, project quality, data incorporation, and effectiveness. So creativity simply describes how new or interesting your project is, how creative it is, and how and the originality of its contribution to environmental art. So we don't want to see something necessarily that's been done a million times, especially if you're using a data set that is widely publicized, such as a climate change data set. I think that we're looking for new ways to communicate trends that maybe some people would be familiar with. We're looking at the quality of your project, so how skillfully and effectively you've used the medium of your choice. And data incorporation is another huge part of the creative component. We're looking at how accurately and clearly you've portrayed the data trends that you spent some time describing and illustrating in your graph. So do you communicate those trends clearly, and do you incorporate them in a natural way into your project? Do you just stick a graph on your painting and call it a day, or can you really illustrate what your graph is showing through purely visual tools? And the effectiveness is just what we use to judge whether your project meets the goal that you state in your explanation of your creative project. So when you're writing about your piece, you'll want to mention the intended audience for your project and what you were trying to convey. And so based on what you said, we're going to look at your project in light of that and see if it meets your stated goal. So a couple notes on project submission. We do project submission via Google Drive. We've been doing that for the past 2 years, and it's been working pretty well. So when you are ready to submit your project, either on or before May 27th, you can email me, or I'll probably reach out to you via email with a link to a personal Google Drive folder. So only you and I have access to that folder, and it's going to be empty, and you're going to upload your Data Jam project, your report, in a PDF or Word document form. And depending on what the medium you choose to use for your creative project is, if it's a video, we prefer that you upload your videos onto a private or unlisted YouTube account. You can talk to me after if that's something that you are concerned about. But that just makes it much easier for us to distribute the projects to our judges during the judging period, is if they're via YouTube. Any visual art pieces that can be scanned or photographed, scanned and uploaded onto your computer, such as a drawing, will accept the scan as a JPEG. You can attach it directly to your written component, or you can upload it separately. And then any sculptures or physical models, we've seen a couple of those, can be photographed from as many angles as you think necessary, and you can upload those as well. And also, just a quick note, if you're uploading your videos to YouTube, you would like to make sure that you are not using any copyrighted music or any copyrighted sounds or images, because YouTube tends to snatch those up and take them down. So just so you know, most music is copyrighted, but I can also give you some resources for finding Creative Commons music that you can use, but always good to know. And once again, your projects are due on Wednesday, May 27th by midnight. And if you have trouble accessing your Google Drive folder, you can contact me at any time. And Bess, I actually did not include the uploading procedure for Baltimore Data Jam. If you have a couple words to say about that, if it's any different.
Yeah, so if anybody here is from Maryland, the Baltimore Data Jam competition is very similar. We have our own website though, so you will want to go to baltimoreecosystemstudy.org and navigate to the education page to find the Data Jam, the Baltimore Data Jam competition materials. We also will set up Google Drive folders for submissions. So once you have registered your team, that folder will be set up and the link shared with you.
Excellent, thanks. I and Bowie and Bess are all available via email to answer any questions you may have. Bess and I can be particularly helpful with data set interpretation, technical support for Google Sheets or Excel, whatever your graphing method is, and then the logistics of project submission. And Bowie, what should people contact you about?
Yeah, if you have any questions about a project or a way that you're thinking of making something and you want to have an art conversation about, maybe some materials that would be good to convey it, or if you're sort of know exactly what you want to say, but you want to have a conversation about how to tell that story, I would be delighted and available to do a little Zoom chat or FaceTime or some sort of communication, Google Hangout, where we can talk about ways that your family might make that art project with things that are readily available during this odd time where we're in our homes. So, just a way to spark your brain and get you excited about making the creative part happen.
Thank you so much for being available. It's definitely, the creative project is fun, but it's definitely a real challenge. And it can be hard to figure out a way sometimes to tell a complex ecology story through visual art or through any art form. So Bowie's been a huge help, and it's just a great resource to have for critiquing or any sort of conversation.
Studio visit, if you want me to come mid process and see how it's going, I'm happy to do that too.
Actually, the studio visit, that would be wonderful.